Salvete omnes. Welcome to the AP Latin live stream. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Yesterday, if you were here, you know that we went over our first practice test, timed and everything with a countdown clock. And today we're going to be going through the answers with you. So welcome back.
Hello, everyone. Let's go to I guess everyone wants the answers right now, right?
I bet they want to know what we think the answers are.
What we think the answers are.
Right. Key, what we think the answers are.
So who are you?
As always, my name is Jenny Luongo, and I teach at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Austin, Texas. Also, just a reminder that if you have questions during the live stream or even afterwards, you can tweet them at us. I'm at Parwa Luongo, and I'll let Ben share his Twitter handle too.
I am Ben Johnson. I teach at Hamden Academy in Hamden, Maine. And I am at Latin Tutorial. I think one of the things maybe we should volunteer ourselves for, I didn't pass this by you, so I'm sorry, Jenny. But if you have any questions about the stuff that we're going over, if you're like, well, I put this down, like, do you think that's correct? Like, we can't say for sure, but like, it's one of those things where we could say like, well, yeah, no, I think that you're probably off here, and that answer isn't acceptable. As we go through the questions that we're going to do here, like we're gonna give you our answers, but there may be answers that are acceptable beyond the scope of what we have written down here and what we're going to talk about. So that's something where you can double check with us, not wanting necessarily to spend the rest of my week answering questions on Twitter, but I mean that's what we're here for in some ways. So some people say we're a great I guess supplement for being in class, or being like a second teacher and stuff like that. So that's something that I would do for my own students. So why not to the Twitterverse?
Yeah, so to that end, the great thing about Twitter is that it is public. So if you ask a question about whether an answer was correct, then other people can see it, and you can always look at what people have already asked and see if your answers are correct. We also want to warn you guys that while we are here to help you, to go over answers, to give you our opinions about what are acceptable, and to also give you questions that we think are going to help prepare you for the actual exam. We can't guarantee that these questions and certainly the passages aren't going to necessarily be representative of what you see on the exam itself. We're certainly doing our best for you guys.
I mean, you might be doing your best. I'm definitely, just kind of sitting back, just writing the wave, right? Mailing it in. Is that right?
No, we're both definitely doing the best we can for you guys, but we want to just kind of give you that caveat as we go into things here, looking over the answers. Also, one thing I'll point out that you guys may or may not know. The answers to the exams are actually determined after the exams are taken at the AP reading, where educators gather together and talk about what answers should be acceptable. And they certainly look at what typical students answered, what typical students answers are as they're developing scoring guidelines and that sort of thing. So while Ben and I can take a guess at what we think is going to be on the scoring guidelines, it's not one or two people that make that decision. It's really a big group of people. So, Ben and I, as I said, we're doing our best, but we don't always know exactly what the opinions of that whole group of people will be, right?
I mean, right. And I think there's maybe an answer that's expected when the questions are written, but then, sometimes you can't anticipate all of the answers. And, there are acceptable answers outside of that one idea maybe that's thought about. And if that's the case and you put down a right answer, then it will be right, even if it's not one of those things that shows up. So we'll often have answers here that have like slashes, and that's to show like there are alternate things here. There are alternate ways that you can translate stuff. And especially when we're translating like a verb or a noun here, there could be a lot of different English words that you can use to translate that correctly. And that's perfectly fine. Like you shouldn't worry about like, well, I use the word boils, but it actually should be is bubbling or something like that. Like, that's it's okay. That's fine. If you feel that it's a correct translation and that you look up in your dictionary and you see it there, then give yourself credit for it.
All right, so as we're looking at prep this week, one piece of good news for you guys is that on Friday, our special guest is actually the chief reader for this year's AP Latin exam.
I can't wait.
I know. And
I've
so
got some
Dr.
burning
Moss,
questions to ask her.
Yeah, no, we're going to have a great conversation. And Dr. Moss is actually the person who does, in the end, make all those determinations about what the acceptable answers are and that sort of thing. So if you also have burning questions for Dr. Moss, you can try tweeting us with those questions too, and we'll see if we can ask them. We don't have forever though. But
do you think Dr. Moss loves Rolling Stones?
I think so. I think so.
We should ask her that.
Yeah, we should.
Okay.
We should. All sorts of questions. So today we're reviewing practice test 1. Tomorrow we'll do a second practice test. Thursday, no worries. Thursday we'll go over the answers. Friday, Dr. Moss will be here, and we are planning a final probably game of Kahoot, something like that.
With Dr. Moss.
With Dr. Moss, we're going to see if the kids can beat the chief reader. So that's a fun and exciting thing, and we'll see if Dr. Moss is our friend after that.
All right. We'll have to handicap her too, I think.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, we'll try our best, guys, to make sure that she's distracted through the whole game.
All right.
Okay, so to give you a quick overview, a reminder of what the AP exam is going to be, which is coming up in hey Jenny, it's in less than a week. Did you know that?
I know. By this time next week, they will all be finished.
It will be
hopefully.
by this time next week, you will be so happy.
Yeah.
So there's a Q1 question 1, which has 2 parts, and then Q2. So the Q1 are the things that you've seen before, the syllabus passages. One's Vergil and the other is Caesar. And for yesterday's, we had, I think, 9 questions each. And then Q2 is the cite passage from the works of Vergil. And our yesterday one had 7 questions on that. I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's been announced that there'll be 9 questions on the syllabus passages and 7 questions on the sight reading. So
okay.
I think we tried to do the right thing. Like I said, we're trying, kids. We're trying.
Trying our best. Well, you're trying your best. I'm trying my worst. Okay.
I don't believe it.
So this is the Vergil passage here. And I think if you look at this, one of the things that I tell my students to do is, look at the line numbers. Here it's from book 1, 430 to 437, and try to figure out the context of this passage. And you can look at it, and once you understand the context, then maybe some of the answers come a little bit more quickly. You might say like, oh, this is the B simile. Okay, great. I understand. I see some of these things. This person speaking in line 8 down there. That's Aeneas. He's approaching Carthage. Okay, if you can give yourself that little bit of context, then some of these questions might just come a lot more quickly. And if you did do the practice test yesterday under the timed conditions, you might have experienced some time pressure. So that context is great. So that would have helped you with the first question here, where it's name one and only one literary device found in line 1 and write out the Latin word or words that illustrate it. And if you were like, oh, this is the B simile, then when we ask you for the literary device, you're like, it's a simile. Okay, and the answer here is qualis, which means like just as or just like. Fun note, all similes are metaphors. Not all metaphors are similes. And so metaphor is also acceptable here. Yeah, I think that's good. We had talked maybe about possibly alliteration with apes aistate, but that's something, especially with alliteration, like you need to be careful with. Often people consider alliteration to be like with consonantal sounds, and then the vowel sounds apes and aistate are different there. So just because they begin with the same letter, don't automatically default to alliteration. You might want to try to look for something a little bit more
even
nuanced.
more obvious
even more
than
obvious.
alliteration
well, like
is
the
qualis, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about that so many times.
Yeah.
Our loyal followers know that.
So what noun is the subject of exercet in line 2, and translate the noun verb pair in context. And notice too, by the way, that we've bolded the word and. So that's important. You have to answer both parts of the question. And so the subject of exercet is labor. A lot of people think that apes is the subject maybe, because it's the bee simile, but it's actually the work simile because we're comparing the work of the bees. And so labor here, and then when you translate the noun and verb pair in context, it's the work or whatever, keeps busy or works or exercises or busies or anything like that. So make sure that you do that and you do both parts of that question. And yeah, I think this is something that people might have gotten wrong, thinking that it's the bees that's doing the action here.
All right, so looking at the next part of the simile where we start seeing all of the things that the bees are doing, and notice that the verbs change to third person plural verbs because now it's the bees
Good
that are the
point.
subject
Yeah,
of those verbs.
that's great.
So cum in line 3 starts, guess what, kids? A cum clause. So, that's really all you need to put for the type of clause that it's contained in. And so this particular cum means when. And one tip that I have for you is when you've got a cum clause that has indicative verbs in it, like stipant and distendant, then cum really can only mean when. I'm sure you guys know that cum can sometimes mean since or although, but that would mean that it would have a subjunctive verb. Okay, so you can kind of use that as a double check of your instincts as you're going through the test. In line 4, we're going to look at the word dulci, the adjective dulci, and figure out what it modifies and the case and use of that noun. So dulci could be dative or ablative. Remember, the I ending in third declension happens in adjectives in the ablative as well. And so as I look at that section going from et, which is kind of a divider for us, throughout in the next line, which is another little divider for us, the only thing I see that's dative or ablative is nectare. So that is
which is you might think is a present infinitive or something like that.
right, but it's the noun nectar. How exciting
Not surprisingly.
that it looks like the English, right?
It's not the verb to nectar.
Right, exactly. So the bees distendant, they stretch the storerooms, the like the cells of the hive, dulci nectare, with sweet nectar or by means of sweet nectar. So Ben has talked a lot about how when the translation is with or by means of, then that's an ablative of means. So that's what we've got there. And then question 5 asked you to name one and only one of the bees tasks. It's important that you followed instructions, as Ben was saying. So only pick one. And so if you've got several options, like you do here, have a couple of options in lines 5 and 6, because those are the lines asked about in the question, then pick the one that you're most confident about translating if you have to translate for that particular task. Notice though that the bees are doing things more than just in lines 5 and 6. The bees, we talked about how they start doing the action in line 3 and continue into line 4 with the verbs. It really starts in line 2 with that cum clause. It's really important that you focus on the lines that they're asking you about, because even if you tell something that is a bee's task, but it's not from lines 5 and 6, it's not going to be an acceptable answer. So we'll see that several times on this test, that you really have to focus on
right,
lines.
and note that the pay attention to the words in parentheses here in this question, because that's important to make sure that you're that if the words are listed for the lines, that's from out onera down to arcant. Like that's kind of a clue for you to make sure that it's found in those.
So as we look at those lines, there are a couple things that the bees are doing, expressed by those two verbs, accipiunt and arcant. So accipiunt, they receive onera, the burdens venientum of those coming to the hive. Or the other thing that you could have put is that arcant, they keep the fucos, the drones, which are also called the ignawum pecus, the ignorant herd, praesepibus, away from the hives. So that also is an option.
Yeah, no murder hornets here, right?
Oh goodness, those pictures are terrifying to me. I have a serious insect phobia. I don't know what it's called, but I'll
Apparently
have to look that up.
Japanese bees are honeybees are awesome at keeping murder hornets away from their hives.
Well, I guess I need some of
They,
those because.
I'll tell you afterwards how they do it, but
Okay, good. That's what I need. That's the information I need because those murder hornets are terrifying to
yeah, for
me.
some reason Vergil didn't put that in here. I mean, I don't know why. He must not know much about bees. Okay, number 6. Translate in context a praesepibus in line 6 and identify the use of the appellate. So note here, this is something that came up when I was doing this with my class or looking at their answers from yesterday. You got praesepibus, but you've got this in front of it, and that even though it's just one letter, is a word that needs to be translated. And so you need to translate this as from the hive, not just the hive itself, but from the hive. And this is an ablative of separation or place from which, and you see that from the this idea of from. They keep those drones away from the hive.
And we would obviously accept from the hives. I know our best students are going, but praesepibus is plural. A lot of times, those poetic plurals will go either way on. Don't you think, Ben?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So don't worry if you put from the hives and you're thinking, oh no, Jenny and Ben said that the singular translation was acceptable. Really, either should be fine.
Yeah, trying to, and sometimes it's hard actually looking this word up to try to find that.
Were,
It always means like
were you?
stables and things like that. That's what I was doing right then.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were looking up the place from which.
No.
No. Yeah, I think it can
Yeah,
be separation or place from which, right? Okay,
yeah.
good.
Price sepe. This is weird sort of. Oh, it's because price-sipe. So there's also a lot of other things like folds, stalls, stables, pens, things like that that can be used. Probably it would be acceptable here because this is a figurative use of price-sipe. Do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think the in context is the key, that they're not going to take stables probably or something like that because it's talking about the bees. But again, I can't really speak for all of the readers, so I
Right.
could totally be wrong on that. But I would be careful about context on questions like that.
You don't have stables for your bees?
I
Huts? You
don't.
don't have huts, bee huts?
Yeah, I don't have any bees, but I'd love to get some.
Okay.
Maybe someday.
Okay, just be careful for the hornets though, the murder
Yeah,
hornets. Okay.
exactly.
So identify the tense of fair wet in line 7 and translate. And just to let you guys know, and we caught this at the end of last live stream, this was a typo in the questions and in the passage that we got where it said fair went. So it is present, and even with that typo, it'd still be present. The translation of it though, like you could have translated in the third person plural if that's what you had. That's perfectly fine. But really opus here is the subject. So it's the work. Boils is boiling. There's some different translations for fair wet here. It's definitely a figurative use of the word. But unless they're trying to burn the murder hornets up. So.
Well, and just a reminder to you all, there are lots of people whose job it is solely to proofread the AP Latin exam. So don't worry that there's going to be a typo on the AP Latin exam itself. Ben and I are working as hard as we can, but remember we have other jobs, we teach school, all of those things. So if there's a little mistake in the practice exam we give you, it's not going to happen on the real thing. So don't stress. Don't stress. Not going to happen.
Right.
All right, so looking in line 8, we've got this great exclamation from poor Aeneas, oh, fortunati, oh, fortunate ones, whose moenia, whose walls, jam sorgunt, now rise. So moenia could be nominative plural, it could be accusative plural, but you can probably hear from the way I translated it that it is the subject of surgunt. So the case and use is nominative subject. And don't be afraid to put something like nominative subject or accusative direct object on the AP exam. They're going to be asking you to make sure that you understand these basics of Latin grammar. So don't think that they're trying to trick you with some of these questions. They're really doing their best to make sure that they're fairly assessing whether you know Latin, and that certainly is a fair assessment of that. All right, then.
Like the most important assessment too.
Right, exactly. That's definitely what we're trying to do, is to give you a chance to show what you know about Latin.
Right, and be happy. You're like, yes, I know this, and it is a
Right.
nominative subject, but I know that it's the subject.
Yeah. Question number 9 is the question that's going to ask you about your English reading. So, according to Jupiter's prophecy in Book 1 of the Aeneid, what city does Aeneas' son build, and for how long do their descendants rule there? So, it's important that it's according to Jupiter's prophecy in Book 1, because of course, if you're looking at Roman history, maybe they did rule there longer than what Jupiter said. But we're really paying attention to Jupiter's prophecy. And so it's Aeneas' son Ascanius, or Iulus, who builds Alba Longa. And Jupiter says that the kings descended from him will rule there for 300 years. And it's this great prophecy where he says that Aeneas is going to rule for 3 years at Lavinium,
Yeah.
and then Ascanius is going to get to rule for 30 years, and then their descendants will rule for 300 years. So it's got that mystical, number of 3 that shows up in ancient numerology all the time, just kind of multiplied there.
Yeah, great. And I don't think that the math adds up. I don't think that brings us to 753. So
Math schmath is what Vergil says.
right, exactly. Okay, so here is the second part of that Q1, the Caesar syllabus passage. And again, thinking about this, putting it in context, note that it says it's from Book 1, Chapter 3. And we see in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th word there, it's big, capitalized. We see Orgetorix. So, okay, this is about Orgetorix, who's the leader of the Helvetians. The Helvetians I know based off of my reading in Book 1, wanted to migrate through the Roman province. And that led to this confrontation with Caesar. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to the first question here, which is translate the phrase auctoritate or getorigis per moti in line 1 and identify the case and use of auctoritate. So you might notice that we're talking about something in the plural here, per moti, and that's a perfect passive participle. So moved or having been moved. And auctoritate is this ablative of means after per moti, that participle, by the authority, and then orgetorigis is in the genitive case, so of Orgetorix. And I've already noted that auctoritate is an ablative of means. You get the
Yeah, I think that's right. And I can hear one of my students in my voice, because now that he's learned ablative of cause, he likes to use it for everything. So not in my voice, sorry, in my head. And I can hear him asking, but Parwa, couldn't that also be an ablative of cause moved because of the authority of Vergil? And I think the answer is probably yes. They're going to accept any acceptable correct ablative, don't you think, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be an ablative of location, but I mean,
Right.
the part of the problem, and we were actually talking about this earlier in the day. I mean, we do talk to each other outside of this live stream
Right.
about, and I mean, like, what do Latin teachers talk about? They talk about uses of the ablative, um, and how close
Veritatem.
certain ablative uses are, and some ablative uses overlap, and it's also like, in some ways this is maybe sacrilege, but Latin writers probably weren't thinking about specific uses of the ablative when they were writing. They weren't saying like, oh, I really need an ablative of cause here, and so I'll put this down. And this is definitely not an ablative of means. This is an ablative absolute. It's not an ablative of cause or time, when, or attendant circumstances or something like that. Like so like they're writing in their natural language, and what we do after the fact is we try to analyze that. And sometimes there's overlaps, like a Venn diagram, and some means kind of overlap with cause if it works that way. So and if you can work it like some, then that's great. Like sometimes a cum can mean when, or you can maybe make the case that it means since. If you can make the case, then you can make the case. So
Right.
okay, is that good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you get the big one.
Okay. So, again, identify one and only one thing. Follow the instructions, kids. The Helvetians determined to do in lines 1 through 4, constituerunt through confirmare, and write out the Latin that tells you that. So, constituerunt is the verb that means they decided. So here's where all the things that they determined to do start. So they decided comprare, to buy, to acquire, ea, the things, quae, which, like pertain ad proficiscendum, to setting out. They decided coemmere, to buy up, quam maximum numerum, as great a number as possible of humentorum et carorum, of carts and pack animals. They decided to facere, to make, quam maxima sementes, as many plantings as they could. They decided to confirmare, to strengthen, pacem et amicitiam, their peace and friendship, cum proximis civitatibus, with the neighboring states. So
Okay,
you
so
just needed one.
I have a question though.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you can translate something literally when it asks to identify something and give the Latin, like that literal translation is going to be correct. But you don't have to be literal, right? You can paraphrase.
Yeah, unless it says translate. If it says translate, you should be as literal as you can. But if it says identify, then you can paraphrase and then quote the correct Latin. That should be
So
fine, I
yeah,
think.
the question is how specific should you get when you're when you're paraphrasing something? If you're allowed to paraphrase for this question, how specific? And my recommendation is be as specific as you know. Is the case, right? Parwa, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, be as careful as you can about not giving information that's incorrect, because that's going to nullify your answer. So you want to give information that you feel confident about, and you want to be as specific as you can with that information you feel confident about. Does that make
Right.
sense? Okay.
Yeah, and if you're too general, you might not get credit. Like if you're like to get stuff, like that may or may not fly, right?
Right.
Or if you're like to plant,
Right.
or if you just write the word plant,
Yeah.
that might not be good enough. And so if you know more and you know that it's correct, then don't try to be brief for the sake of brevity.
Right. Right.
Try to answer the question to the best of your ability so that the readers that are reading your response can give you the points because they know what you know.
Right. Right.
Okay. Okay, so question 3, translate the phrase ad proficiscendum in line 2 and identify the verb form of proficiscendum. And this is a gerund phrase. And with that odd, you can translate it as for setting out or to set out. Both of those should be fine. And verb form, I think it's clear that gerund is what we want here. We don't want something like deponent or accusative. We would want something that like the thing that kind of stands out. Question 4, translate in context quam maximum numerum and identify the degree of maximum. And so this is where you have to understand the use of quam plus a superlative, which is as blank as possible. So as great a number as possible, and again, maximum is a superlative. Degree, it's one of those things that you know, but you might not know unless you've studied what degrees are, that a superlative is a degree. And then give the tense voice in use of the infinitive confirmare in line 4. It's a present active infinitive, and complementary is its use because it completes the meaning of constituerunt. They decided to make peace, to confirm, to make strong their peace and friendship. And again, for tense and voice, if you don't really know what those are, go with what you think is like the most obvious things with that. Like, I know that this is a present active infinitive, so we'll assume that that's what they mean by tense and voice.
All right, so now looking at the last part of the passage, identify the case and use of biennium. So duxerunt is part of that passage in line 5. So they thought, we talked about how duco can mean to like lead a thought through your mind. So they thought that biennium, a 2-year period essay, was, notice that's an indirect statement. So biennium is the accusative subject of that indirect statement. Then in the next line 6, is sibi legationem ad civitates suscepit. So the sibi is always going to be referring back to the subject, which is here, he. So the he that we're talking about is orgetorix. So that's who sibi is referring to. We do want to make a note that there's two sibis in this passage. There is also a sibi in line 5. And so that may have thrown off your answer because that sibi refers back to a plural subject. So again, be super careful about line numbers. That's really important. Then identify an ablative of accompaniment in this passage. Ablative of accompaniment is one of the two ablatives along with manner that uses a cum. And so, that's what you should be looking for if you're looking for ablative of accompaniment. So cum proximis civitatibus is our ablative of accompaniment here. And that's where they were strengthening peace and friendship with the neighboring states.
And,
All right.
and so do you feel that if they just put down civitatibus, that would have been okay?
I would think so, but again, I always am hesitant to speak for all the readers.
Right. So again, like if you know that ablatives of accompaniment are cum prepositional phrases, then go with that whole thing, and then you know that you'll be good because you're illustrating that. So. Okay, and this is an even longer one. So what is one reason Caesar gives later in the Bellum Gallicum for attacking the Helvetians? Answer in 1 or 2 complete sentences. I think all of these are just one sentence. They were not trustworthy. These are all actually have connections into specific parts of the Gallic War. And so there's one spot where Caesar says that they aren't trustworthy. The fact that a Roman consul like Lucius Cassius had been slain and or a Roman army put under the yoke in 107. They came close or crossed into the Roman province without permission. We read about that. They were intending to march to the territory of the Ambari, the Aedui, and the Allobroges. The Ambari and the Aedui pleaded for help against the Helvetians. They were going to attack the Romans, or they were a credible threat. Or you could talk about the idea of Roman self-defense in dealing with the Helvetians. They did not comply with Roman requests and had to be punished. They attempted to expand their control over Gaul, and their departure from Helvetia and a possible advance of the threatening Germans into their vacant land could pose a threat to the Romans. So again, the question asks for one and only one reason, and then says to answer in 1 to 2 complete sentences. So you should write in a complete sentence when it tells you to write in a complete sentence. And then these are general responses. You could phrase it completely differently with the same idea, and we're really looking for the idea here.
Ben, one of the students just tweeted at us and wanted to know if they listed multiple reasons and kind of eventually got one correct, if that was acceptable. And I want to be really clear on these one and only one questions. They're going to grade the first thing you write. So there's really no point in writing more. They're not going to cull through and say, oh, okay, did they get there eventually? They're really going to grade the first reason you give. So give your first and best reason and be done. Don't waste more time on that question because you have limited time.
Okay, how about this for another question too from Twitter? Can you be penalized for extra information if it's correct? For example, if they ask for tense and voice of a verb and we put tense, voice, and mood.
I don't believe that they would penalize for that if the extra information is still correct.
Right.
I could be wrong. Yeah. I do want to say that my question came from Jeremiah, who has very sweetly also tweeted at us a Teacher Appreciation Week tweet, which we really appreciate because we miss our kids. We miss being with our kids this week. So thank you for that. All right, so moving on to the Vergil cite passage. This was a passage from book 12, which you probably haven't seen unless you just are, casually reading some Latin on your own, which is great.
And why not, right? Who isn't?
Right, exactly. So Ben's advice to kind of look through and see what you can determine from, just a quick read through is a good idea. Stay calm when you get the cite passage. That is my biggest tip for you. I know when I took the AP exam, I got what we called the spot back then and kind of panicked, and I can still see where I was sitting when I took the test, which was a long time ago, kids, because it panicked me so much. But then once I took a deep breath and calmed down, I thought, oh no, I recognize this passage. And I think with this, you're probably not going to recognize the cite passage necessarily, but you can tell that there's something going on with people you've heard about, like Jupiter.
Trojanos in that second line, Trojans.
Exactly.
Right? There's a bellum there. There's war. There's lands. I see
Yeah.
some other capitalized words here that we'll talk about in a bit.
Right, like Saturnia, things that you've read before. So yeah, don't panic. Don't forget, you can use your dictionaries. You can use your resources because it's open book. So just stay calm. Have your resources ready before this question begins, and let's get into it. All right, so name one and only thing that the addressee has been able to accomplish in lines 1 through 4. So this is one of those one and only one thing questions that you should be pretty familiar with by now. So he says, this is Jupiter speaking, he says, potuisti, you have been able to agitare, to chase the Trojans, terris vel undis, on lands and on waves, on the sea. You've been able, accendere, to inflame infandum bellum, unspeakable war. You've been able deformare domus, to defile a house. You've been able to miscere, to mix humanaios wedding songs with grief. Then you're going to name one and only one literary device found in line 3 of that section. And we've got several different options for you. There's the alliteration of deformare domum. Then there's the metonymy of the wedding songs, standing here actually for weddings. And then last, but certainly not least, because this is a great answer, there's deformare, infinitive, domum, accusative, and miscere, infinitive, humanaios, accusative. So you've got the A, B word order synthesis. All right.
Question 3, translate seek Jupiter Ursus in line 4 in context is important, and identify the tense of Ursus. So seek is thus or in this way or so, lots of different possible acceptable translations. Jupiter is obviously Jupiter, and then Ursus here began. In some ways, this is kind of like functioning as a main verb, Ursus. I believe that probably having begun would have been okay too, because it is kind of a perfect active participle.
Yeah, although it's not really, I don't know. I think they're probably going to expect them to imply the est and just say began, but, who knows?
Orsis is perfect tense, so
Yeah.
that's the second part of this question. And translate submisso vultu in context line 5 and identify the construction. So this is an ablative absolute, the noun and participle in the ablative case, with face having been sent down, lowered, lots of different possible translations for submisso. And again, this is an ablative absolute, so there's lots of other ways that you can translate this that are acceptable and so forth. And as long as you go with something that's correct, then the readers will mark it correct.
Yeah.
And by what other Roman name do we know the entity referred to here is Saturnia in line 5? And what is the origin of the name Saturnia? Answer in 1 to 2 complete sentences. This is referring to Juno because she's the daughter of Saturn. So again, it says to answer in 1 to 2 complete sentences. Make sure that you answer in 1 to 2 complete sentences. So don't just write Juno equals Saturnia, daughter of Saturn. That isn't what they're looking for. They want it in a complete sentence. And we know this from book 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, number 6, identify the case of Jupiter in line 7 and identify an adjective that modifies it. So this is challenging because Jupiter could be nominative. It also could be vocative, which happens to be what it is. So if you look, you'll see Jupiter is set off by commas. That's often a clue for the vocative. You've also got tua voluntas in that kind of same area, which has to be nominative. Remember, look, if there's something ambiguous, look 1 or 2 words away, and that'll help you. And then also magne is modifying it, which has to be vocative. So it is vocative direct address, and magne is the adjective it goes with. Identify and translate a first person verb in this passage. You really only need 1, but there are 2. So you could have put veto, I forbid, or you could have put reliqui, that last word in the passage, I have left behind, I've abandoned. So Juno says, I've abandoned Turnus et terras and the lands. I'm
In
not
vita,
fighting that
though.
war anymore.
In
Exactly.
vita,
In vita,
unwilling.
unwilling,
Yeah.
unwilling. All right.
With this vocative of direct address, like sometimes you don't know that like accusative direct object or vocative of direct address is the case, but you know that the vocative case shows the person that you're talking to. You could Jenny, I think it's probably okay if you write vocative that shows the person that she's talking to. Do you think
Yeah,
that'd be
yeah.
okay?
I do. I think they're gonna really be trying to give credit
Right,
for kids showing what they know. Yeah.
right. But then the other question that I have is if they only put down vocative of direct address and they don't identify the adjective that modifies it, they're not looking to give half credit for these questions. So it's all or nothing.
Yeah, all or nothing. So you really need to answer the whole thing. Somebody asked about that Jupiter Ursus question. What if they translated it thus? Jupiter said, having begun. And I think that would be totally fine. You just need to indicate that there's like some implied verb there. Yeah,
Right.
so that's great. Great
Okay, so
translation.
we have some tips, hints, and advice. These are things that, like in talking with my students and looking at their responses, or even in like thinking about how like some things that you might want to do and think about going into the exam on Tuesday that you should keep in mind and stuff. So number one, be sure to answer all parts of the question, paying special attention to questions with multiple parts. Like that's what we just kind of talked about, especially with that and there. And as you're going through, make sure that once you've answered a question, you've checked it off and that it's something that you've completely answered rather than you've left half of it out, because you don't want to know an answer to a question, but you haven't fully answered it and then not receive credit for that. Read each question and make sure that your response is what the question is asking for. That's really important, especially if the question asks for Latin evidence or a response in 1 to 2 complete sentences, right? Read the whole question, make sure that your response is what it is going to give you points for that. Get your setup. So I think if you're thinking about like exam day, the College Board recommends that you like get ready 30 minutes before the test time, because the last thing you want to do is scrambling at the last minute. Make sure you have your APID, your ticket with you, all of that stuff. And then decide how you're going to be taking this test. If it's something that you're going to be writing on a piece of paper and taking a picture of, get that ready. Make sure you have your pens and pencils with you so you don't have to rush around if a pencil breaks or you run out of ink. And if you're going to be taking this on a laptop or something like that, that you have your apps set up in the correct orientation on your screen so that you can just, once it starts, you can just think about the Latin and not have to worry about the format. Make sure that you use your approved resources, the dictionary, translation, textbooks, and manage your time well. So this is just from me. Since for Q1, it's 25 minutes before the upload period, but there's 2 passages. Something that I think maybe is a great way of thinking about this is spend the first 10 minutes working on the first passage and the second 10 minutes working on the second passage, or even like spend the first 10 minutes working on the passage that you feel you are the most comfortable with. And that way you can get to large parts of both passages. You'll have 5 minutes left after that. So then spend the last 5 minutes filling in holes, going back maybe to that first passage after you've kind of worked through that second passage. Again, the last thing you really want to do is to run out of time because you didn't manage your time appropriately and you spent 23 minutes on the Vergil because you were working through it and you want to try to get everything correct. But that said, like, make sure that you upload your questions, because you could still do exceptionally well on this and even get a 5, even if you don't answer every single question. So don't fail to upload at that end. We came across this yesterday with that the typo, and I think we need to remind you guys to turn off autocorrect, because if you're going to be typing Latin in on your computer, tablet, phone, however you're doing it, often autocorrect is going to change Latin words to English words. If we're looking for Latin evidence, that's going to be a big problem. If you're uploading a photograph, make sure that you've practiced exporting, uploading JPEGs or PNGs, and that you've checked your settings ahead of time, because some phones may default to a different file format. Like iPhones, this HEIC format for like live photos and stuff, and that's not going to be accepted by the College Board. So that's a problem. Practice, guys. Practice with this. Make sure that you can export a photo and you know how to work with your Photos app or your camera app in order to get that down, so you're not spending the whole 5 minutes trying to figure out how to actually export and to prove that you know Latin. And then begin submitting your response at the beginning of the 5-minute upload period. Again, you don't want to run out of time. And running out of time and failing to submit is not a reason that's going to be accepted for taking the makeup test. So spend the whole 5 minutes if you can, trying to upload and get your answers in. Any other tips, Jenny?
The only other thing that I would mention for students is that yesterday on the online teacher community, we got some documentation uploaded from the College Board about some details on exam questions, which we've definitely used to, as we said, try to craft a test for you guys that is going to be really helpful in preparation for the AP exam. But one thing that was on there was a list of skills that are going to be tested. And one of the skills that was not listed was 1E, which is scansion. So we've had a lot of questions about whether there's going to be a scansion question, how to answer it, that sort of thing. And I think we can say now that there's not going to be a scansion question.
Yeah, and there wasn't on the practice test yesterday.
Right, and so there won't be on one tomorrow. Yeah,
and
exactly.
There won't be one on Tuesday, May 12th.
May 12th, yep, exactly.
Okay. May the 12th be with you.
All right, so these important links have really helpful videos and other things that you can watch to get ready. So pause on this video when you go back and rewatch this or whatever, and find which videos you need to watch. All right, I think that's all for today. We'll do another practice tomorrow. It was great to be with you all as usual. Practice exams are super exciting, so we'll see you then. Walete omnes.
Walete.